Welcome to Urban Arc. I'm Jagdish Krishnaswamy, and it's my pleasure and privilege to be moderating this panel on nature and the city, political ecologies of urban flux. We have 5 exciting talks, which will be a pre-lunch treat for all of us. And those of us who are working in the area of environment, whether we are in the monitoring environmental degradation or environmental or ecological restoration, we often need a political ecology frame or a lens and a mirror to actually understand the impact of what we might think as either a negative or a positive transformation through various types of dimensions, whether it's a rights perspective, whether it's environmental justice, or even the imagination of nature in the city and how that has impacts of various kinds on a variety of stakeholders. So I will now have the first call upon the first speaker. We're going to go in an order of to have a mixture of online and others who are already here, present here physically. And we have about 12 minutes each. So please keep to your time, and we will remind you in case you're close to the end of that. We also request that the folks here sitting here, please speak very close to the mic and switch it off when you're not speaking. So the first talk is by Nivedita. She's going to be speaking on planting for penitence. So Nivedita.
Should I begin? So good morning. The title of my talk is Planting for Penitence, a political ecology and legal geography perspective on court-ordered plantation drives in the Central Ridge, New Delhi. And I am working with the Forest Department of the Government of Delhi. Yeah, so the Delhi Ridge is the northernmost extension of the ancient Aravalli range. It is characterized by rocky projections and a thin, dry, sandy soil, which is best suited to support an open canopy thorn forest. As you can see on the map, it has been divided into 4 administrative sections: northern, central, south central, and southern. And I will be looking at the Central Ridge, which lies adjacent to the Rashtrapati Bhavan and thus is least accessible to the public. The Central Ridge came to be in 1913 under the Indian Forest Act of 1978. This was the first forest to be reserved. 9 villages and their grazing land were razed in order to create this forest. And the idea behind this was to create a backdrop of greenness behind the Viceroy's Palace, now the Rashtrapati Bhavan, emulating the aesthetic of European cities like Rome. Now, the Central Ridge is divided into 6 pockets alphabetically for administrative purposes again. Now, while the boundaries may be dominated by the non-native species like Prosopis juliflora, Vilayati kikar, which is often referred to as an invasive, native species, so from my experience within the ridge, native species are scattered within. The narrative that it is completely filled with Prosopis juliflora is not true, because you find mushrooms popping up, you find colorful, beautiful plants all the time. So, you find a stinkhorn mushroom, you find puffballs, earth stars, and a lot of things. And beautiful fruits, and the trees completely fill up with flowers in the summer. Now, if you go into the ridge, you'll find all these odd boards, and one would think, what does this mean? 100 plantations for Aparna Bhatt, 200 plantations for Mark Sahab. What does this mean? Who is Mark Sahab? So Mark Sahab is actually someone called Merck Sharp, and Merck Sharp is a pharmaceutical company which was penalized for a patent violation. And on the 11th of March 2019, the Delhi High Court Judge Najmi Waziri ordered respondents in this drug patent case to plant 140,000 trees in the Central Ridge. Now, I'm going to explore these tree plantations using two theoretical perspectives. One is political ecology, a counter to traditional apolitical ecology, which contextualizes using social, political, economic factors. And the second is legal geography, which looks at how law and landscapes co-constitute each other. So the objective of my research is to use political ecology and legal geography to identify the discourses underlying these court orders, investigate the processes through which they're actualized, and understand not only their ecological implications, but their interactions with the ecosystem. Methodology, first is ethnography. It's been 2 years of working with the Delhi Forest Department, content analysis of court orders and judgments, vegetation sampling, and literature review of floras, books, scholarly pieces. Now, Najmi Waziri's first judgment reads, the central ridge located in the heart of Delhi must always be green and will be a residual carbon sump to serve the city for many future generations. One must always remember that it is suited to support an open canopy dry thorn forest. But for Waziri, it must always be green. It must be evergreen. So the first discourse underlying the court plantations is that tree planting is intrinsically good. It is a form of justice. It can compensate for crimes. It can solve Delhi's pollution problems. Larger the crime you do, you're going to plant more trees. And then the plantations must be constantly surveilled, and mapped, manicured, much like a bagh or a garden, not a forest. So the central ridge, the court order further reads that the central ridge is covered by vilayati kikar. As the name suggests, the tree is vilayati, of foreign origin, and quietly spreads over large areas, giving only the impression of a green cover. So the second discourse is that natives are good and invasives are bad. In fact, invasives are evil. Prosopis juliflora only provides this illusion of green cover, and it's necessary to remove it. And the trees planted must be native, deciduous. So how is Insaf Bagh actualized? So the Delhi High Court asked the guilty parties to provide funds to the deputy conservator of forest, my boss, who hands it over to the range officer, who gives it over to the forest guard, who gives the money to the contractor. Then the nurseries supply the saplings, which are given to the workers, which are planted in Insaf Bagh using sewage-treated water from the Delhi Jal Board. The environmentalists influence the Delhi High Court in its activities. The guards protect the Insaf Bagh from not only monkeys and nilgai, but also the other non-human creature, which are cattle from the nearby urban villages. The Central Reserve Police Force is the one sort of penalizing and attacking urban villagers and their cattle. And this again was ordered by Najmi Waziri. So the court provided this list, which is vague. You see there's no scientific names. You can see that species like, for instance, bud and banyan, both are the same species. These are repeated. Native thorny species, narrow-leaved species completely absent. Species that are broad-leaved are only present, and evergreen species are only present. Now, the Delhi High Court has also been sort of altering its list with time. Like, the list was initially created for plantations in different parts of the city. Then it was imposed on the ridge. Then the ridge, it didn't survive there due to the rocky terrain, so it was edited again. Now, even if the court provides a good list, there are nursery limitations. Like, there are two species which would be commonly known as kadam. One of them is broad-leaved, one of them is not. But the nurseries cannot supply Mitragaina parviflora, which is native to the Delhi ridge. So we have monocultures of Neolamarchia kadamba. So 91 cases, 2 lakh plantations ordered, 50,000 trees planted, 60% of them from 4 broadleaf species, and the disturbed landscape even more vulnerable to invasion. As you can see, monocultures all abound. Is large-scale tree planting good? Existing literature already tells us it's not. Forests can in fact regenerate themselves, and these regenerated forests are more capable of carbon sequestration. So completely false narrative. Scientific literature has already disproven that Prosopis juliflora is a villain. In fact, at times it has been studied and found to form associations with natives. Its impacts range from negative to neutral, and the richest plant community is more affected by anthropogenic disturbances like mass plantation drives. So ridiculous. Insaf Bagh is a continuation of 2 legacies: the colonial legacy of exclusionary plantations, wherein, you fence everything. The CRPF is stopping the people and the communities. And in the 1990s, the court started this activity of trying to force its control over forests. And that was the time when a lot of communities were ousted from the ridge. It's a continuation. And also, so both of these legacies culminate into an exclusionary, ecologically unsound model of justice. Okay, but the court orders are not just, being imposed on the landscape also reacts. So for instance, air pollution in Delhi is generating mass support for tree planting. Even weather patterns shape the court orders. Following a thunderstorm where several trees fell, Najmi Waziri extended the ban on tree cutting which he had imposed earlier. He in fact ordered for more plantations in the central ridge. And also the landscape, the rocky terrain is in fact influencing the court lists of plants. So basically there's this dialogue between the ridge's landscape and the court. And the ridge is more than a mere backdrop. This is what the framework of legal ecology legal geography helps us understand, that the ridge is not merely a backdrop. The ridge is an actor in itself.
Fascinating narrative, Nivedita. Thank you. Now, the second talk, Riverfronts with Ravines by Hariyali and Dipani.
Hello, am I audible? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Is my screen visible now?
Yes.
Hello everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'm Hariyali Gajera from Ahmedabad, and I'll be presenting my research on Riverfronts with Ravines, a case of Sabarmati River in Gandhinagar that I carried out for my bachelor's degree in urban design at Faculty of Planning, CEPT University, Ahmedabad. Due to urbanization and changing lifestyle trends, rivers and riparians face negligence, especially in urban and peri-urban areas. They are undervalued as ecological systems and are instead turned into dumping sites or, as recently seen, lands for real estate development. Their original connection to society as spaces of community cohesion, various informal occupations for a wide section of society is being lost, not only becoming an eyesore to the city, but also imposing a serious threat to its ecology. Moving to Ahmedabad city. In Ahmedabad, the Sabarmati River has been a river full of cultural history. The city was made here because of the river and its peaceful meandering nature. Activities like small-scale non-mechanized fishing, farming, grazing, dhobi ghat, Sunday markets and the seasonal circus kept the river and its riparian edge vibrant. The ongoing trend of hard-edged riverfront development projects has led to loss of this social and cultural characteristic of Ahmedabad's riparian edge. Here we can see the changes in Sabarmati River in Ahmedabad, where the riparian and parts of bed have been reclaimed and developed into concrete areas and roads with amenities, flower parks and building spaces, provoking us to rethink the edge development of such areas and whether it can be done differently or not. Adding on, by 2030, we are expected to have a metropolitan city as a result of Ahmedabad-Gandhinagar agglomeration. This leaves us with an opportunity to develop a 20-kilometer plus of undeveloped river edge on either side. But for this, we first need to make our case of ecological importance of river edges and riparians, and hence this project was carried out as the first step towards a long-term project in Gandhinagar, hoping to influence the policy and future planning. So here is Gandhinagar city and three sites that we selected along the river edge. One is Indroda, Borage and Muktidham. The side with the higher urban settlements is the eastern edge and this is the western edge of the city. The three sites were selected in order to include as many possible variations of typology, social and ecological. As you will see, The riparian here are ravines, and which are looked upon as unsafe and marginalized spaces. Our study wishes to change this perception of ravines. Our main research objectives include to assess the floral diversity via photo documentation in 250-meter by 250-meter plots using random of the area via observation and satellite imagery, to study case studies of ravine management and conservation, and to offer the list of recommendations for soft edge development. This study was carried out in the period of February 2022 to April 2020. Now, I shall take you through the three sites as quickly as possible. This is our first site, Indroda, showing how we divided the study sites into 4 zones. Upland, which is on the eastern edge, midland on the road edge, lowland or riverbed, and midland on the non-developed edge. Upland is the closest to the urban settlements. This section crosses the ravine structure. The eastern edge has a village settlement, and some parts of it have been abandoned after mining. The western edge faces minimal human intervention. The photograph here shows the midland on the eastern edge, which is abandoned after mining, leaving the room for invasives to proliferate, and the higher areas still harbor native flora, mainly ficuses, as one can see in the picture. The riverbed here has a barrage structure and has been extensively mined. The soil quality, in addition, leads to there being no water holding in this region. Here, we can see the forested midland on the western edge, which has more dense green cover and more floral diversity like Indian globe thistle, thorny nightshade, and several others, though there are also invasives like Gando bower. Coming to how the study area is used, the upland where Indroda village resides are pakka housing along with fruit trees and mixture of local and non-local flora. The midland region here is used for firewood collection and grazing. The western edge here has a soft embankment constructed due to barrage, which allows some flora to grow and wildlife to move around and forage. At the same time, the midland here in the opposite edge experiences sewage runaways from village and mismanaged waste running down to the riverbed. Now, this is the list of flora, native and invasive, that we documented on the sites, which we categorized into trees, shrubs, herbs, grasses, ground cover, and creepers. And these are the images of some of the dominant native flora that we found on this site. This is site 2 borage, and a similar process was carried out here as well. Here, the ravine network is denser and stretches. The landform here is undulating on either side. The eastern side has a village and has the variation in land, and hence the variation in landform differs on the opposite bank. A few traces of mining here as well can be seen, creating such kind of edges along the bank. The bed being least disturbed by human activities and being furthest from the main road becomes a hotspot for diversity of water plants and other diversity, including migratory birds. Among the three sites, water can be found in this portion of the river almost all throughout the year. The photo here from the western bank shows an institutional boundary approaching the wild, whereas an intact disturbed ravine structure from the within the native vegetation on the left. The urban edge on the eastern bank has village that is comparatively larger than Indroda, but further away from ravine, scattered built forms, religious shrines, along with forested midland. Small-scale commercial activity is happening in the upland. This site has two institutions, Naipur and IIT Gandhinagar on its western bank, and much denser ravine network on both banks compared to Indroda. Few instances of ravine network can be seen in upland, which is often used as back to all the household activities and used for dumping. The other image is from the riverbed having French wells that cater to the water needs of the villages nearby. Here is the list of flora that we documented on site 2.
Folks, I think the speaker got disconnected, so
I'll share again, yeah. Yeah, is it visible now? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, despite the mining on the bed and landfill site on the eastern edge, the ravine structure here is comparatively intact and creates varied landform. The western edge is comparatively flatter. The eastern edge is comparatively flatter. The ravine from the eastern edge is complex and amid invasives it still holds significantly diverse floral species. Major portion of the bed here is exposed to mining and it also has sewage puddles accumulated from the runoff from the nearby settlements. Western edge here has a wall-like landform created from the mining and these now have become nesting places for little green beetles. The upland of the eastern edge at Kacha house settlements mainly occupied and built by migrant communities from Rajasthan involved as labor in sand mining. The settlement has no formal amenities and uses the ravine gullies for dumping and sewage disposal. The ravine on the eastern edge has been flattened from the urban edge to carve out pathways for mining trucks to move. On the western edge, a portion of western forest still remain, but there is heavy infestation of prosopis and hyptis, both invasive. This area is under Forest Department and the Defense Forces. Here is the list of flora that we documented on Site 3 and some of the photographs of dominant floral species that we found here. Other than floral diversity, many spots, especially on the western bank forest, seem to be hotspots for wildlife to gather and forage. Few such photographs show here nilgai and langur. Here langur is eating tephrosia pods and nilgai foraging mainly on acro. Here is a comparative table that highlights specific factors across all three sites. Borij being furthest away from the urban area and having institutional land use has the densest and intact ravine structure. Site 3 being furthest from the Ahmedabad city has major height differences in ravines and has more floral diversity than other sites. Indroda, on the other hand, being the most exploited site, provides us with species that are most resilient to adverse conditions, but has the lowest diversity in flora. Given rich forested landscape that still remain in Gandhinagar ravines, can the riparian be reimagined as spaces of ecological and environmental function with community ownership? Alongside site observation, we looked at few case studies where ravine structures have been conserved, one of which is Chambal Ravine Restoration Project that uses measures like vegetation barriers to stabilize ravines, hedge plantation, mechanical structures to slow down the water, slope modification and multi-step leveling to create spaces for farming. This case study provides us with a mix of natural and engineered to restore and stabilize ravine ecology. Another case study was from Toronto, Canada, where they've taken a multi-stakeholder approach to propose a city development on ravines. Various dedicated zones for preservation, restoration and recreational activities have been marked to create a region to be developed as leisure and recreation space amid ravines within the city. Given the purpose of ravine is seen, we suggest recommendation for future design. Local flora documented on the site can be used as alternatives to currently present invasives and ornamentals. These species allow us to incorporate both nutritional and ecological value into the design proposal. Considering the safety aspect of ravinous areas, certain areas can have access to temples, firewood collection, hiking trails, bird watching trails, and forest walks within the natural terrain rather than having conventional concrete promenades. If and only if mobility corridors are to be introduced in proposal for boosting real estate value, that can be done by having technology that does not require flattening of land to construct structures or by constructing roadways on stilts. Such ecologies will also require regular monitoring and removal of invasive species. Local diversity can help further elaborate and adds on with more such design suggestions for the design proposal. Now, being from urban design background, my vision here is to see a middle path in development of riverfront designs that is somewhere between this that we have today and this that is intact in the forest area, and hence creating spaces that are socially and ecologically viable and an asset to the city. Thank you all of you for listening and everyone who helped me during my thesis research. Thank you.
Thanks, Hariyali. Your work has great significance for all the riverfront development that is planned in cities and towns across the country. So the next talk is on the planned beautification of Bada Talab by Shubham.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Shubham Bhardwaj from Central University of South Bihar. So I'm doing a PhD. So this study is a part of my PhD. So plant beautification of Bada Talab in Ranchi, India, a study of perception and practices of local communities. This is my topic. Okay. Okay, fine. Oops. Yeah. So coming to the context. So a significant shift is taking place in the conception and production of urban nature in developing cities in India. In this regard, urban beautification policies have been growing popular with urban local bodies. Plant beautification has been adopted for the restoration and sustainable conservation of ecologically degraded public commons and corresponds to conceptual framings and a system of meaning related to urban environments. Applying the approach of urban political ecology, this study recognizes plant beautification and resulted transformation as a process of hybridization. Considering the post-structuralist approach of urban political ecology, the paper studies the hegemonic environmental imaginary reflected in the beautification policy and consequent changes in everyday practices around the urban ecological commons. This paper also studies the perception of beautification for various user groups of public commons from the various stratum of society. So coming to the public commons, cities have enormous effect on the natural environments, and the overarching dominance of urban growth have undermined the ecologies in cities. Urban ecological surroundings such as public parks, gardens, lakes, ponds, wetlands, and urban forests are crucial ecological sites in cities. These ecological sites, besides delivering important environmental services, also provide social and psychological services which are of crucial significance for the livability in modern cities. These natural spaces having ecological benefits have been shaped by social and cultural practices and are increasingly being recognized as public commons. So, what is the plant beautification? So, as environmental degradation of urban landscape is often seen because of urbanization, the political program of city beautification, which emphasizes on improvement of greenery and nature in cities, is making its way primarily to have the image of a green city and recognition of the importance of urban nature for the health and well-being of urban dwellers. Rapid urbanization and the growing pressure of urban living have caused a large-scale human-induced alteration to the nature at public commons to turn the natural spaces and resources to be used as a commodity with use and exchange value. In this regard, beautification policies have been growing popular with urban local bodies to generate revenue and to facelift the city's image to project the city as a prominent location for activities driven by the markets. Plant beautification corresponds to the conceptual framings and a system of meaning related to urban environments. At the same time, plant beautification has also been adopted for the restoration and sustainable conservation of ecologically degraded public commons. The beautification policies raises the classical question of political ecology, which is who wins and who loses in this change process. So now coming to these urban political ecology. So as a conceptual approach, urban political ecology as a conceptual approach understands urbanization to be a political, economic, social, and ecological processes that studies the co-production of nature and society, which implicate history, technology, and power in its investigation of uneven distribution of and access to urban environments. A structuralist theorization of power has been a central focus for many early UPE research that traces the uneven flow of commodities that traces the uneven flows of commodified natural resources through networked infrastructure into and through cities, often making it unequal. Yeah, I will come to that also. So, yeah, by expanding its approach, UPE has started to engage with the insights that emerge from post-structural, post-humanist, and post-colonial theories to include distributed power and everyday practices, subjectivity and governance, and the concept of modernity and environmental imaginaries. This study is situated within the post-structural UPE to argue that a diffuse notion of power allows for an understanding of urban environments as produced through everyday practices. The study of the changes in practices around the commons happening due to plant beautification focuses on discursive power that has emerged out of urban political ecologies, post-structuralist articulation of power in the production of urban environments. This approach explores the socio-environmental production of environments through plant beautification as a material and discursive process. By taking the post-structuralist approach, this paper examines the hegemonic environmental imaginary reflected in the beautification policy and the consequent changes in everyday practices around the ecological commons. So, what is the political ecology of plant beautification? Plant beautification projects presents a conceptual language, an idea of imagining the city that overcomes the binaries of nature and culture to look at the ways in which ecology, community, and justice intersect. The paper recognizes plant beautification and the resultant transformation as a hybrid production. The hybrids are socio-natural assemblages constructed with the help of scientific knowledge and capital as well as nature and its resources. The production of hybrid embodies both material process and the discursive and symbolic representation of nature. Post-structuralism focuses more intently on macropolitics of urban environmental discourses resulting in the dominance of hegemonic environmental imaginary in the production of hybrids. So, here I was coming to why I choose Bada Talab in Ranchi. So, Bada Talab in Ranchi has been considered a relevant case study for two key reasons. That key reasons are first reason relates to the location and demography of the city. Ranchi is a small capital city in the state of Jharkhand witnessing unprecedented urban growth. This small capital city is distinct from the large metropolitan cities which have always been focus of many research projects. Furthermore, Ranchi has a significant amount of tribal population, making the research more grounded in everyday practices around ecological commons that integrate nature and culture in the city. The second reason is Bada Talab in Ranchi. The second reason for choosing Bada Talab in Ranchi as a case study is that unlike the other cities where poor indigenous communities are primarily immigrants attracted to this city to secure better livelihood, the tribals of Jharkhand in urban space are mostly original inhabitants, providing a unique and relevant case study to explore from the perspective of urban political theory, urban ecological theory. So, I have tried my hand on QGIS to show you. This is field site of Bada Talab. So, Ranchi Lake, also known as Bada Talab, it is situated in the heart of Ranchi city near Upper Bazar. The area of Ranchi Lake is approximately 52 acres and the maximum depth is around 10 meters. The average depth of water is 2.2 meter. It is a man-made lake excavated by Colonel Onsley, a British agent in 1842. The Bada Talab has the Upper Bazar area in the northeast, that the northeast side, Sainagar and in the north, Bhumiyar Tuli in the west, and Nizam Nagar in the southwest. The lake is situated between the dense population and is managed by Ranchi Municipal Corporation. Bada Talab is an important part of Ranchi ecosystem. So, though relatively small in size, it performs significant environmental, social, and economic function, ranging from source of livelihood for some local communities, recharging groundwater, acting as a sponges to control flooding, supporting biodiversity, and providing recreation. It also contributes spiritual well-being as it has also cultural and religious significance. It is one of the critical common property natural resources which is under renovation and witnessing vast socio-ecological changes. So, plant beautification project of Bada Talab. So, the name of the policy is the rejuvenation and sustainable conservation of Ranchi Lake. So, the first phase of beautification and restoration of Bada Talab began in May 2017. A 33-foot high Swami Vivekananda statue have been installed inside the lake with an access bridge and a main entrance. The Bada Talab is a vibrant and lively area and is more crowded in the morning time and the evening. Beautification work is going on and one can notice the construction material around. But still walkers and visitors can be seen. The park which has been made to the entrance of the approach bridge of Vivekananda statue. Here it is green patch. That is the park. Okay. The park which has been made to the entrance of the approach bridge of Vivekananda statue was closed as some work was in progress, but people can be seen entering the closed park through a place where a fencing rod has been removed to make way to enter the park. Just outside the park, some tea stalls in makeup tents are there where one can spot people smoking, having tea and snacks. I inquired to the seller to find that most of his customers are regular customers who work in the nearby shops and offices. As Upper Bazaar is one of the main business area of Ranchi, several shops, offices, restaurants, bars, and hotels are around the lake near the Upper Bazaar sites, that the green patches area. Several small and big shops can be spotted around the area of the lake near the park. Further going to the north, the park, going to the north, these 10 feet wide landscape pathways are made around the lake. You can see that. Okay, I will come there. That yellow lines. Okay, fine. Just leave it. Thus, I will come to this point. Interview with a washerwoman. Just will take 2 minutes more. Okay. So I just interviewed with the washerwoman. Just 2 minutes. Okay, quickly. So see there that we come to the lake every day to wash clothes. Our homes is in Hindpidi. I have tied up with 2 hotels, and I wash clothes collected from these hotels. I am doing good business, although no one stops me from washing the clothes in the lake. But municipal officers do not allow to dry the clothes within the vicinity of the lake. When I spread the clothes for drying, I always must remain watchful of the officials coming here. In the past, they have thrown the washed cloths spread on the spread for drying on the roads. So one interview with this fisheries community, we are not allowed to fish in the lake. Either we used to sell fish. Earlier, we used to sell fish caught from the lake, but now we sell fish which comes from Kolkata. Municipal corporation has promised us to give employment to run boating services in the lake. So finally, that okay. Coming to the conclusion, different hegemonic environmental imaginaries coexist in shaping the public commons. The hegemonic discourse of sustainable conservation dominates the beautification policy. The need of local communities have not been comprehensively integrated in the beautification policy. This study finds the conflicting perception of urban nature being produced. The study points to the challenges being faced by local community while executing their everyday practices due to the implementation of the beautification project. And there is a sense of loss and exclusion for the local communities. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Shubham. That was beautification is definitely versus social ecological restoration. These are 2 very different things which you have brought out. I would now ask Shalini to speak on the multiple forms of environmental injustice.
Hi. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just start. Sorry. 1 minute. I've got the wrong one. Yes.
Hi, so I will be speaking on the multiple forms of environmental injustice. It's an urban political ecology study of Jawaharnagar dumping yard in Hyderabad. And just before starting on, I think the context, it's Jawaharnagar dump yard is the city's main dumping yard ground in Hyderabad, where estimated 7,000 metric tons of waste is generated by the city, and it is transported daily by the GHMC, or the Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation. But the dump yard actually can process and has a capacity to only process 5,500 metric tons of waste a day. And in the recent study, which was conducted by the Center for Water Resources in 2012, it is stated that the landfill has caused significant groundwater contamination, and it also means that that it has also affected significant environmental, like the health damage to the communities. So my idea is to move on, and part of the research that I've been trying to do is to and how is the environmental injustice reproduced on the communities in multiple ways around the dumping yard in Hyderabad, and what are its multiple forms? What are the parameters that influence the community's access to this justice and injustice? And what is the role of identity, in particular caste, gender, and occupation and reproduction of this? This other two parts of it, which are not a part of the presentation, but a part of my question, is what are the articulations of visions of justice and the visions of future by the communities impacted by the dumping yard in the urban? And what are the ways in which the capacities of communities and the states can be built and sustained to realize this vision? So as moving on, as we are talking about urban political ecology, the framework I wanted to really understand and use was because it's one of the critical, understanding. It complements the views of environmental injustice, but also the fact that it explores the unequal power relationships. One is of access. So who's in power, and those who in power, how they control the access to resources. Also look at the power relationships of utility and quality of resources, in the sense of what is the quality of the resources that the communities are getting, and how are these resources being used, and also the identity and equality structures it generates. Of how gendered, race, and caste identities are built, they're developed, and how that particular identity influences this access to space, resources, and social political process. This is just like one of the important aspects, which I won't go through very much, but one of the theoretical frameworks was to start off with environmental justice approach, was to look at David Skolsberg's elements of distributive justice, recognition justice, procedural justice, and how to understand how these different justices and injustices sort of interact with each other in this particular site. And one of the important works that really had similar questions and influenced my questions was when the environmental justice movements actually started in the United States in 70s and 80s in the form of civil rights struggles, where the movements actually started questioning the dumping of hazardous waste, and it was closely linked to issues of race and class. In that, particularly Robert Willard, who published the article Solid Waste Sites and the Black Houston Community, was very influential in that regard. And I also find this work greatly influenced by Laura Polito, who basically studied the resistance among Mexican Americans, which was caused by the exposure to pesticides and conflicts over grazing. And another one, sociologist David Pello, who basically analyzed the politics of garbage dumping in Chicago and showed how minority and poor communities carry the cost of dumping in the form of exposure to health risk. So moving on, particularly in understanding critical environmental injustice, basically what Pello talks about is how critical environmental injustice is about paying, like trying to understand environmental injustice from an urban political ecology framework. I'm looking at how do you pay more attention to the multiple social categories, and how you look at it from a transformative approach rather than a reformative approach to challenge inequality, and how you focus on humans and more than humans nature, which is indispensable, and And another important work that Gordon Walker has done is to look at the dimensions of vulnerability, need, and responsibility, which I will be looking in my work to understand the differential vulnerabilities of different social groups. And this basically means that some people will be more affected by the environmental impact than others and may also have less capacity to recover from it. So moving on to my work, I have looked at the site, the communities around the site, which are 5 bastis around the site within 3 kilometers of the Jawaharnagar dumping yard, and also a case of a public housing project, which is right within the vicinity of the dumping yard. The methodology I've used is a qualitative research methodology, particularly looking at grounded theory, because I realized that even before I started these questions, I was a part of my everyday work was around the community, and the more I realized that grounded theory organically came in, which is the idea of grounded theory basically is that the data collection analysis occurs simultaneously, and that the more you sort of, because they are both tightly interwoven, as you collect the data, you analyze it, and as you learn from the analysis, you continue to collect more data, and it's a cyclical process. And I've also used focus group discussions and in-depth interviews in the 5 sites for around 40 community members to understand and explore different themes of injustices. Particularly, one of the important aspects of these like the conversations that I've had with the community members spoke about different themes, one of which was health injustice. The preliminary analysis of it showed that a wide list of health complaints from community members, along with the conversations that I've had with health providers in the community around skin diseases. There are high incidences of abortion, fatigue, vector-borne diseases like dengue, malaria, and the other high incidences of water-related diseases in the community, apart from poor child health and also poor child immunity that was very much a part of their everyday experiences of how the environmental and the hazard has been impacted on the community. Second theme that came up was around the housing injustice, which is closely linked to the idea of spatial injustice. In this particular aspect, particularly, there is a 2 BHK dignity housing it's basically a double bedroom housing scheme which was started by the government of Telangana. It is around provide the dignity to the poor. But along with the 2 more housing units by the government, this particular 2 BHK housing unit is very close to the vicinity of the dumping yard, which increases the vulnerability of the marginalized communities who are already vulnerable. And in the other 2 housing unit experiences of Rajiv Gurakalpa and Indira Awas, which are also in the vicinity of the dumping yard, there is a close association of the health related issues that they're facing because the dumping yard is so close to their houses and communities, but also how this peri-urban area, which is so far from the city, is really increasing their distance from house to work, which basically, because of which they're also not able to economically, find work in the area. One of the pictures of it. And the third aspect which came up in the conversations with the communities is around the planning injustice. One, obviously related to the previous case that I was talking about, the housing policy, where the selection of the site of the dumping yard and the 80 to 100 slums which were around this area. And how the privatization of the management of the dumping yard, which was actually handed over to a corporate, which actually is trying to not provide public services, and there are instances where the locals are being removed from their jobs of waste picking if they're protesting against the health injustice, and also that the preferences is given to the other the workers from the other states to depoliticize the issue. So that the locals the local communities do not protest and talk about the environmental injustice. The study also finds that there's a lot of ineffectiveness of the CSR and the corporate welfare funds basically that are provided to minimize the impact on the communities by constructing water purifying sites, which were very, very few. It also talks about the state and its institutions delay in finding alternate sites of dumping, and so that the burden of the of the place is reduced. So, and this is one of the Karmika Nagar, which is right in the vicinity of the dumping yard, in which I also conducted my interviews, and it mentions, and it actually the pictures show the different kinds of the injustices that are actually happening apart from just like environmental and water pollution, the housing. It also speaks of the kind of health issues that the communities are facing. Another aspect which came up, which is sort of very important, because looking at the dumping yard as a site, the nearby communities, the livelihood question was very, very, very prevalent, in the sense that the communities that were dependent on the lakes and the fishes around the area, and there were 5 lakes that are very much interconnected, they were no more able to carry out their living depending on the lake, and the water body and its functional and cultural value also perished because the lake was no more functional. The cattle and the communities that were dependent on the lake were shifting their work. And studies have also shown, and the previous studies which basically show that the groundwater quality of this area is completely toxic. So no water pumps can be used there. So every household, most households buy the private water, and there's only one basti in which Mission Bhagirath River project, basically it's a public piped water project, is actually functional, and only one has a water purification center. So because in the nearby vicinity area, the ecosystem of lakes is such that all lakes are linked to one another. The pollution of one lake basically causes the pollution of the other lakes because of the dump yard. Like if you look at it at some from close to 2017 to like even as far as 2021, you had a lot of fishes being killed in lakes because all of these, because the leachate was dumped into and moved into the other lakes. Basically, this is a local Dammaiguda lake. So these are particularly, and while these are different kinds of impacts that are happening, there are certain parameters also to it which increase their intensity. One could be the seasons, because the impacts are very, very high in in rainy season, and the other thing is around gender, festivals, and dominantly the areas belong to SC and BC populations with traditional workers from waste picking and stone cutting communities. Most of them are also migrants from other states also who are settled. So there's also vulnerability of occupation, there's also vulnerability of employment, and there are also new challenges that are coming up which are yet to be studied about the waste to energy plant that is recently being constructed in this area. So I think I'll stop at this. I think I just wanted to conclude that my ongoing, the second part of it will only talk about not just understanding and documenting the injustices, but to look forward on how to build the capacities of the communities to create and facilitate spaces where the communities themselves can articulate their visions of justice and future. And how do you build the capacity of state where the state and its institutions can also be in touch with community, and to look at these multiple diverging visions and also converging visions of these different stakeholders to build better policy and solutions. So that's from my side. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Shalini. Your work will resonate with everybody who's concerned about the impacts of solid waste disposal and dumping yards throughout cities and towns in India. So our final speaker in this very interesting session is Christopher, and he's going to be speaking about Agamben in Rangpuri Pahari, Emergencies and Bare Life.
Hi, My name is Christopher Lingelbach. I spent 9 months this past year in Delhi working with Ambedkar University Delhi and Force, a small Delhi-based NGO, on a Fulbright Nehru research grant. This research contributed to my master's thesis at SOAS, University of London, and the paper I'm presenting today derives from that thesis. My research in Delhi focused on water, and particularly water in spaces beyond the Delhi Jail Board's centralized distribution network. It focused on how water is acquired, used, and governed in these spaces, as well as the leaky pipes, illegal bore wells, and bottled water systems that will enable people who reside in these spaces to access water. Eventually, my research returned to a more conceptual theme, the right to water. My presentation today primarily focuses on a theoretical chapter of my thesis. In this presentation, I put forward a critique of the right to water that draws on Giorgio Agamben's critique of human rights, articulated most strongly in his 1998 work, Homo Sacer. I argue that the right to water implies a centralized state distribution network, both bolstering water as a site of biopolitical control and delegitimizing other non-state controlled sources. This is fundamentally an urban problem, a problem of networks, and a problem of flux. I'll begin by highlighting Agamben's critique of human rights through his concept of bare life, along with a brief background on the right to water in India, addressing how a right to water posits a certain relationship with the state. Next, I'll trace the evolution of spaces beyond the network, examining the formation of Delhi's current archipelagic system, a term borrowed from Karen Backer, by focusing on one South Delhi locality, Rangpuri Pahari. I'll then turn to Delhi's ubiquitous water tankers, allocated by the water emergency arm of the Delhi Jail Board, tracing emergency as a motif that pervades Delhi's right to water supply. To start, let's dive a little deeper into the right to water in Delhi. While Section 9(1)A of the Delhi Jail Board Act of 1998 limited the DJB's mandate to providing water to legal settlements, excluding approximately 30% of the city's residents, in 2015, the Aam Aadmi Party changed the long-standing policy, extending the right to water to all. The DJB subsequently announced in 2021 it would provide piped water to all unauthorized colonies. This articulation of a right to water, common in discourses of water supply in Delhi and elsewhere, explicitly foregrounds the state, and particularly the state's centralized network, as fundamental to enacting this right. Delhi's policy is implemented on the backdrop of the UN's proclamation of the universal right to safe and clean drinking water for all, which itself implies a presumption that this right is the responsibility of the state. In Agamben's view, human rights are those that transform the body and life into the biopolitical regime subject, meaning a regime which takes as its founding principle the governing of life. In his view, a framework of rights creates a certain type of governed subject, one that relies upon the state for a certain type of protection and has certain needs. Rights intended to bolster citizen prerogatives and limit infringement by the state, simultaneously deepen subjectification to sovereign regimes. Agamben's powerful critique of human rights, focusing on how human rights are defined by their exteriority and how these rights create certain types of subjects, shaped my critique of the right to water. I frame this right as a site of subject formation in relation to sovereign power and view water as an article of biopolitics. 300 years ago, residents of Delhi's medieval precursors of Shahjahanabad obtained water through a variety of baulis, stepwells, and hose, or tanks, scattered throughout the city, as well as ghats on the Yamuna River's edge. While various inequities existed, residents accessed these ecologically sustainable systems through a mixture of manual labor, animal power, and payments to domestic servants or bishtis, with community wells serving as centers for interaction and fellowship. The British Raj era was shaped by two movements concerning water supply in Delhi: the decline of historic water systems due to a mixture of neglect and purposeful closure, and the sluggish implementation of a centralized water supply network. Crucially, this new system implemented by the British failed to reach the entire city, even as upkeep of traditional sources diminished. Yet the failures of the system concerning universal water provision only increase the power of the bureaucracy managing it and the extent of its infrastructure, with each failure fueling the need for subsequent interventions. What were the results of this newfound centralized system? Rather than universal access to clean and safe water provided to all residents, water access was now both controlled by the state and radically unequal throughout the city. These centralization efforts reified state power, guiding behavior through both overt and subtle means. While these actions on the part of the colonial state preceded modern right to water discourse, they represented a similar impulse and similar outcome. Attempts at universality frequently lay bare the spaces of exception inherent in any project of creating Agamben's good life. These centralization efforts greatly expanded the biopolitical order of the state, its ability to define and differentiate life, and contributed to creating spaces of bare life, the life of homo sacer, sacred man, who may be killed and yet not sacrificed, to quote Agamben. Delhi, like most other large metropolises, currently primarily relies on a centralized distribution network managed by a nodal agency, the DJB, for domestic water supply. Centralized water supply and state control of water has roots in urbanization projects in the global north from the late 19th century through the networked city, through which the networked city became what Cotard and Rutherford refer to as the hegemonic social form. These spaces often comprise archipelagos, destabilizing the network forms that are perceived as dominant with regard to water provision. These archipelagos often implicate projects of co-production or hybrid infrastructures by extending networks rather than functioning as a separate form of water distribution. Rangpuri Pahari, a modern-day colony in South Delhi, is located less than 3 kilometers from Indira Gandhi International Airport. As one wanders through the narrow lanes of its Jhuggi-Jhopri clusters, planes bound for far-off destinations soar overhead. The brick-constructed buildings, often roofed with sheet metal, feel incredibly distant from the world-class city of Delhi in which they notionally exist. Water tankers sent by the Delhi Gel Board reach the settlements closer to the main highway, though not on a consistent schedule. These tankers have been one of these settlements, like Jhuggi-Jhopri clusters throughout the city, as primary sources of water supply for over 20 years. I first came across the Delhi Gel Board's Water Emergency while working with Force, a Delhi-based NGO which focuses on water security and conservation. On a visit to one of the city's ubiquitous water tanker filling stations, I noticed a signboard that flanked the entrance to the tanker filling complex. It simply read Water Emergency, not Department of Water Emergency, nor Water Emergency Agency. Water Emergency is simply the entity within the Delhi Gel Board responsible for supplying more than 700 water tankers a day to residents, primarily of Jhuggi-Jhopri clusters. The varied ways in which Water Emergency, the department, instantiates in the city in both urgent and routine fashions demonstrates both the precarity coincident with the state of exception and the relationship of this precarity to the right to water. In Israel camp in Rangpuri Pahari, water tanker arrival is a routine event, though the timing is inconsistent. It can come anywhere from 3 to 7 in the evening, and residents must wait by the side of the road until it appears. Yet in no way does it resemble an emergency or a solution to an emergency of water access. The tanker has been coming consistently, sent by the DJB, almost every day for the past 15 years. There was no abrupt occurrence that spurred the arrival of this tanker. This is not a refugee camp or a resettlement colony, but rather a voluntary settlement on public land, forest land. The dwellings are often 2 to 3 stories and have an aura of permanence to them, with small shops dotting the cluster. Yet Water Emergency still arrives each day. Yet in other areas of the city, Water Emergency is only called on the rare occasions that piped water supplies are inadequate or fail. The differential ways in which Water Emergency instantiates its emergencies in different areas of the cities define states of exception. The perpetual emergency of Jugi-Dopri clusters is contrasted with the transitory emergency of more formal colonies. This perpetual emergency disrupts the traditional temporality of a state of exception and mirrors Berlant's concept of slow death. Now, what are the implications of this and what are its imports? What imports do any of this have on ecology and the environment? In the interest of time, I'll only touch on this briefly, but I will say that the transition from decentralized and distributed water sources to a centralized network was accompanied by a decrease in the sustainability of water supply. Environmental justifications, such as declining groundwater levels, are also put forward as a reason to restrict non-governmental private water supply, ensuring that even those outside formal networks are still dependent on water-related legal regimes. Water is, in the end, a state subject. This presentation was not intended as a conclusive argument so much as an amalgamation of scenes and concepts that extend Agamben's critique of human rights to a new sphere. This framing of the right to water as akin to human rights calls into question one of the foundational assumptions of urban ecology, that rights-based approaches, such as the right to water, empower the citizen at the expense of the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. That was, water is going to be an emerging issue in all our urban and urbanizing spaces. Now we're going to take questions, and we're going to alternate between the online folks and the folks who are physically present here. So,
there's a question.
So thanks for the insightful presentation and panel. So my first question was to Nivedita. So what I wanted to know is that you spoke about judicial adventurism and things like that. But what I also wanted to know is that have there also been cases of compensatory tree plantation or reforestation which are done by the government, in lieu of cutting forests in other areas in Delhi or specifically in the Central Ridge? So have there been any such cases? And secondly, in spite of knowing that, tree plantations are not a replacement to forest ecologies, why do you think is this still a dominant discourse in the government? We will cut 100 trees, but we are planting 200, so it's justified. So that was my question to you. And my next question was to Shalini. So I really like the way you spoke about a multi-layered injustice. And you mentioned that you're looking at the second part of your research on how people are responding to this, but I just wanted to know what were your initial insights in how the local people near the dump yard are navigating these kind of injustices. So yeah, thanks.
They know online. Hello. Yeah, thank you for this panel. My question was for Christopher. You spoke about the water security and emergency as well, right? So based on your interviews or your conversations with people, I wanted to understand, have you come across conversations where people's claim to water is not just for water, but it is for claiming the larger rights, housing-based rights, like maybe eventually using that as an access to claim for getting a title or some other sort of a recognition that they cannot be evicted. So using that as a stepping stone for getting tenure security. So because there's just a small example, there's a similar water rights committee in Mumbai which has been doing similar things, but it also has a larger impact.
Christopher, the question for you. Interesting to listen to the ways water infrastructure worked bureaucratically through history. shall I gather that from a bureaucratic point of view, Pace, Ferguson, etc., the plans never fail in terms of control. So they become complex overlays. And from your point of view, is it the sovereign power that has started to work less and less without exception, especially in urban infrastructure? This is a question from Matthew from Center for Urban Studies in Kerala.
Hi, thanks for all the papers. My first question also for Nivedita. I was just wondering, because you spoke a bit about a history of ideas of the environment. So I'm wondering, something you touched upon, but currently in a climate where like carbon is seen as the main way of resolving the climate issue, how does this, if you could like explain further how this has impacted not only the kind of ecology, but the management of the ridge, the kind of prioritizing of carbon. And another question for Hariyali was, it seems like sand mining is one of the major, like the economy of sand mining is one of the major influences in this situation you're describing. So I was wondering, what are the kind of interactions on the ground between people working in the sand mining economy and then urban planners or ecologists that come into the picture? What do these contestations look like on the ground? Is there, are those interacting bodies?
I have a question for Shubham. The term beautification is a very specific term, and sometimes in other cities and towns, whether it's a riverfront or a lakefront, there are other types of terms being used, and so this whole question of beautification for whom and who decides what should be an urban beautification or an aesthetic outcome. So any insights that you have on how this was framed in the case of Bada Talab?
One more actually question for you, Shubham. Because you used an urban political ecology lens, I'm actually curious if you would tell us a little bit more about the hydrology and the topological systems within which this Bada Talab is located. How is it connected? I mean, you said that it's also involved with like sort of groundwater rejuvenation, but you said it's also a man-made lake. So tell us a little bit more about like how does that system work, and how does this beautification thing work not only within sort of that boundary that you've drawn of the lake itself, but more in terms of how the system of water on which this beautification thing is very site located, but there is a much larger system within which this sits, right? So just tell us, it would be good to kind of hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think we will now have the panelists respond to all the questions.
Hi, so thank you for your question. In fact, this was one thing which I have been looking at, but due to the paucity of time, I couldn't discuss. So you know why it's a dominant discourse? It is easy. It is innocuous. You can pretend that you're doing something, but you're doing nothing. You're destroying that ecosystem. I'm very intimately connected with the Central Ridge. And what is happening right now is stupid. So what can the court do, right? The court cannot make systemic changes. It cannot address the real issues behind the pollution. But you have to, seem like you're doing something. You have to become a judge in the NGT, like Waziri is, on his verge of retirement. So kuch to karenge na, so that I am going to stay in power later and I'm going to be part of the NGT. Same with the bureaucrats. You'll get money. You'll kuch kar rahe hain, that is the thing. And then compensatory afforestation is the dominant mode of environmentalism across the city of Delhi. We have the Delhi Preservation of Tree Act. So if you cut one tree, you have to plant 10 trees. And then Indian Forest Act ke under bhi we have IFA plantation. So this is what the department does. This is what is going on in our cities. This is the reality of what is happening despite us telling that we should preserve our existing ecosystems. You see it as a very quick fix. It's easy. It's uncritical. And also because there's public support, itne ped lagaye, 1 lakh ped lagaye, everybody is happy and nothing happens. And and your question about the carbon, how the idea of carbon sumps is affecting ridge management. Simple. When during the colonial period, the idea was to create an aesthetic. It was to create the idea of Rome, because that is the aesthetic of the great European cities was basically imposed. So at that point of time, the idea was not carbon. It is to make it pretty, pretty, pretty. And that was the time when Prosopis juliflora was first introduced in the ridge. So the invasive species was anyway imposed through the same tree planting nonsense. So that is there. And now what is happening is now you have a new justification. There's a lot of pollution. So you have that. And Central Ridge doesn't have compensatory plantation going on because it's a very politically charged area right behind the Rashtrapati Bhavan. So this thing is happening. So it's quite comical. All I'm just irritated by the whole situation. And yeah.
So, responding to your question, so who decides beautification things? So, these things that discourses, the kind of thing that when I talk to one of the officials, so they said that on the line of Marine Drive in Mumbai, we would enable walkers to get a feel of flowing water. So, think is that kind of decision is the kind of imaginary which they are getting, the discourses that cities should look beautiful, so we should conserve these lake, ponds. So the kind of discourses decides that there. So kind of, and also the suggestions from the local communities have never been taken while they're framing that policy and project. So that kind of imaginary, and so we should look like a kind of world-class city. This kind of things decide that kind of beautiful policy. And coming to their the hydrology and topology. So yes, that Bada Talab is a kind of rain-fed lake. So nearby is a Ranchi hill. So the kind of drainage fills the lake, and this is a kind of rain water only, and that fills the lake.
So in response to the first question about whether people's claims to a right to water are related to housing-based rights and other used as a stepping stone towards tenure security, I would say that was definitely true both in the interviews that I did, as well as kind of, that's a very common feature in the general scholarly literature. But I would also bring up that the kind of claiming a right to water, trying to press claims on the state in an explicit sense could possibly be seen as kind of in opposition to claiming a right to the city in a Lefebvrean sense, in that involves the community or individuals' agency in the way in which they kind of occupy space within a certain urban site while trying to demand a certain type of relationship with the state, whether that's trying to get tenure security or trying to get access to water, can kind of reinforce the ability of the state to then take away those rights in turn. Now, in regard to the second question about whether planning bureaucracy kind of reifies itself or kind of works without exception and reifies sovereign power, I would definitely agree with that and agree that like even failures of planning efforts or development efforts do kind of extend sovereign power or control. But also want to highlight how in Agamben's view, these spaces of bare life or of the existence of those excluded from a regime of rights, whether that's refugees or whether that's certain people in urban areas, kind of highlight the contradiction inherent in rights and contradiction inherent in the nation state and in sovereign power to begin with.
Shalini, you want to answer the questions?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, thank you for that reaffirmation about how multi-layered the issue is. I think the idea also is to sort of understand the intersectionality of the environmental injustice. And I think to your question about how the communities are negotiating, few aspects of it. One is the occupational shifts that are happening around the communities shifting their occupations to construction work, and also related to the greater political economy of the peri-urban Hyderabad. I think so. That's one of the things that's particularly happening. But also the kind of power relations I think I'm looking at even within the community as to few people becoming the contractors for the waste picking, and then the other community members sort of getting into the occupations, even within the privatized sort of the Ranchi privatized management, basically, because the government handed over the privatization and the management of it to a private corporate. So I think so. Because of this, the communities have also shifted to waste picking. So I think these are multi-layered sort of negotiations that are happening, not just with occupation, but also with like trying to shift to the next important occupations around the area, basically. And if, especially in the rural areas, which were surrounding that particular site, who were dependent on the fishes, I think they moved on from agriculture to non-agricultural occupations. So these are kind of shifts that are happening, which are sort of one is to sort of move away from the impacts of it, and in that also I think the groups are not very similar. So in that also there is like a greater power relation, and based on that hierarchy, the shifts are happening very differently. So I think that's particularly interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Shalini. I have a question for Hariyali and Dipani, who are online. The Sabarmati itself in Gandhinagar was in some sense restored in quotes by taking water from the Narmada. So, and that too over a particular stretch of the river, a restricted stretch of the river, to respond to a very different imagination of the river in an urbanizing context. Well, the rest of the catchment is a different matter altogether. And also this question of the certain specific types of geomorphological formations like ravines, which are there in many other riverine areas, including the Chambal, which has been pointed out. And generally, these are seen as sites that need to be transformed, flattened, and converted into other forms of land use. So, so I just wanted some more insights into how such formations are likely to persist given the pressures on land use especially in and around cities and towns, and whether we actually see any future for such social ecological formations in some sense, or sites which seem to be having I would say a pretty short life unless we change our imagination.
Hariyali, you want to go?
Yeah, but you are from the Center for Environment Planning and Technology, not me.
Yeah.
I'm putting her on the spot, Jagdish. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he rightly pointed out that, in the city of Ahmedabad, where this Sabarmati Riverfront Development Project has come and they're drawing water from the Narmada canals because the whole project has been started from a tabula rasa approach where, they treat the whole site as a blank slate and not enough research has been done on what is the ecological or the social situation that persists on the site. And then they assume a whole different scenario that project is going to attract certain kind of activities or it is going to create a boom in the economy. But what currently we have observed in this research is that, planners, firstly, ecologists are hardly involved in any kind of decision making or design process. Then planners are, currently they're still working in line with the politically run agenda. So that's why this research was in a way to provoke a different school of thought in the design process of riverfronts, that the case studies that we did like Toronto and Chambal, that there have been already work done where such areas have been preserved, such areas have been successfully developed into recreational or urban spaces where people can also use it, and the taboo has also been removed. So that's why an in-between approach that was proposed in the study. Dipani, if you want to add to
Hariyali, there is a difference in which the riverfront is being developed in Tapi, is it? It's not as bad as Ahmedabad, is what you had said.
Yeah.
So do you see some hope in the offices managing these projects?
So as I partially also worked on the Tapi Riverfront Development Project, and certain restrictions have been imposed on that particular project, that the straightening of the river bank is not allowed. They have let the river edge meander as it is. Then they have put a stop on removing the mangroves that already exist in Tapi. So somewhere we are seeing bits and pieces of change and a few hopes that there is possibility. Like there along the Sabarmati bank also a few researches are happening along the Koteshwar bank where there are ravines. So since in some of the projects, even in the Pune Riverfront Development Project, the office has taken a slightly different approach by creating soft embankments rather than having hard embankments and concrete promenades. So maybe we can also say that the Sabarmati Riverfront Development Project, the phase 1, could have been an experimental project, and maybe the approach has been slightly changing as the new projects are coming forth, and that's why this research can.
Does that answer your question slightly, Jagdish?
Yeah. There's always more things to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
There is? Okay. This is a question for Christopher. It's pretty much clear that the bureaucratization of water and its rights holds the people out of its natural access to water. But the bureaucratization of water is not just providing the water to people, but also includes water treatment like chlorination, etc., which is very necessary after the evolution of modern cities and its experiences with waterborne diseases. How can we understand this? Is it just rights to water or rights to clean drinking water? And this is a question from Hari.
Thank you for the question. I know that, the right to water in terms of any official articulation includes the right to clean drinking water, which would include treatment of it if the natural source of the water is not sufficient for drinking. I agree with your point there, and I think that what you're touching upon is important, that circumstances have changed over the past however many years since centralized water distribution networks first came into vogue, and that natural sources often aren't usable in their untreated state. But I do think it is important to recognize that that centralized systems aren't the only way to make that water drinkable, to make that water accessible or usable to the people who need it. Yeah, thank you.
We still have quite a bit of time, right? Or no? We ran out of time? Okay, good. So anyway, this has been a very diverse set of topics we've covered, and it shows the opportunity that scholars in the area of urban environmental and sustainability have in applying to very different types of lenses, whether it's the rights perspective, whether it's occupational health, or whether it's political ecology. And hopefully political ecology with, we've seen some good examples today with the good dose of both ecology and the politics around it. So that's a nice mix to have. Maintaining that balance is going to be a challenge for all of us, and coming from different disciplines. And I hope that the session we have had will encourage more scholars throughout the country to engage in urban issues using different lenses, so that we can all learn from each other and move forward towards a different imagination of nature in the city, and how people can engage with that imagination, hopefully for a better outcome in terms of both human well-being as well as ecology. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.